end up on the public video. You can turn off your video or not, up to you. But hi everybody. It is so good to see you all. I'm gonna try to not screw this up and share my screen properly. By this point in our lives, we should all be really good at Zoom, but I am on Starlink right now, so I made Kerry the host, so it's like a little different. I'll just blame that. Okay. So here we are. How the hell do I don't know if I can make it full screen. Is that gonna bug you all if you see the edge thing? I'll see if I can do this. Is it good? I don't know how to make it full screen.
I think it's fine, Sam.
Okay, sweet. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Shadows and Secrets. We are the retreat for mystery and thriller writers, and that is going to be annoying, so I'll just do this. This is the third of our series of craft-focused webinars, all going to be recorded and available for free. We'll pop them on YouTube. You're welcome to share them around. Anyone who's interested. And today's topic is twist ideation, which, if you heard me talk before, is my most favorite thing to talk about. June's AMA webinar is going to cover MTS genre subtleties. Did I spell that right, Kerry? It looks like subtitles kind of. And anyway, we'll be talking about voice and tone as well. And I think Kerry and I are going to kind of split that one up. It's going to be a really fun conversation. And that's on Wednesday, June 26th at 6 p.m. Eastern. A lot of you are repeats, so I'm not going to go super into what Shadows and Secrets is, but I will introduce us. So we are Kerry Savage and Samantha Skal. Hi. We are both experienced book coaches who focus on mystery, thriller, and suspense, scary fiction, horror. We're certified with Author Accelerator as fiction book coaches, which is a delightful organization that gives us dream jobs. And Shadows and Secrets is the writing retreat that we wanted to attend, so we decided to make it happen. Really quickly, I focus on MTS, novel planning, all the way through agent pitching, and my superpower is twist brainstorming. It's the thing I love to do the most in the entire world, and it brings me an intense amount of joy. I am also the co-executive director of Thriller Fest, which is happening next week, which is sort of blowing my mind. For those of you that are coming, I look forward to seeing you. Please say hi and don't take the like hidden intensity behind my eyes personally. It's going to be a very busy week for me, but please do come up and say hi if you see me. I'm a mentor for Women's Fiction Writers Association and the former co-director of Pitch Fest at Thriller Fest, which is one of those events that's just a total blast. I love cheese, wine, and avoiding the sun in the summer because I'm part vampire. Kerry, do you want me to introduce you or do you want to do it?
Well, I can introduce myself. Thank you. I should note that, yes, I am also, I didn't think of putting it that way, but this shade of red that my face is basically like it just gets more intense as the summer goes on and I hit the sun. So yes, part vampire, I think nails it quite nicely. Hi, everybody. I'm Kerry Savage. I'm also a certified book coach, as Sam said. I do not just focus on MTS because my ADHD would go a little bit crazy. I like to think of myself as a magpie. So I like to do MTS and historical and contemporary and women's fiction and all the things, or most of the things. My superpower is synthesizing plot and character and just asking lots and lots of questions. That probably comes from my journalism training or just my natural curiosity, I guess. I am also a WFWA mentor, and I am also a Sisters in Crime mentor, which they just rolled out, and I met my mentee last week and it was amazing. She's so fun. So that's going to be a good time. I also love cheese and good wine, and I'm keeping several generations of aloe plants alive. At last count, it was 5 generations, and I have a baby coming, so that will be 6. I'm very impressed.
Excellent work. For all of you who don't know, Sisters in Crime is not just women. Men are very welcome, and it is a nationwide organization that just focuses on mystery. It's very cool, and they have little local chapters that you can join. It's not very much money, lots of free events and stuff. Big fan, so check it out if you're interested. Okay, so in the next 30 minutes, we're going to recap what twists are and are not, what makes them satisfying versus unsatisfying, and my 6-step process for ideating them. And then we'll end with an AMA and a Q&A, along with a short description of what Shadows and Secrets is, if you have not heard us talk about that before, but I'll save that for after the questions. So those of you who have heard us say it 3 times now won't have to listen to that again. So, just a quick question, Kerry, are all the people over the deck, or is it actually showing up so that, like, is Ideating Twist covered up by the people? No. Okay, great.
You're across the top.
Wonderful. Okay, so Ideating Twists. This is just a recap of what we talked about with what twists are and are not from the last one. But in mystery, thriller, and suspense, the villain's journey is experienced by the protagonist. So I want you to think of a story like a piece of paper, a piece of cardboard, where the villain is bopping along. I'm going to do this without dropping my computer over. The villain's bopping along underneath, and the protagonist is bopping along the top. And as the villain does things, they kind of poke up through the surface of the story. The protagonist receives that, misinterprets it usually, unless you're coming up on the climactic scene, and then goes and makes lots of decisions, and the villain goes like, yes, so, I didn't get caught again. And then in the climactic scene, the villain faces off with the protagonist, and that's the actual truth. And so the villain's truth is what makes a twist, because it's unexpected to the reader and the protagonist. So that is my definition of twisty. Twists do not just sort of come out of nowhere. They aren't like hard left turns for the sake of having a hard left turn. They are plotted and planned and make a lot of logical sense. But the biggest thing is that they're unexpected because the protagonist made incorrect but logical assumptions about what was actually going on. So what makes them satisfying, besides being logical, it's that you didn't predict it, right? Like you were going through the story and you look backwards and you're like, oh my God, I totally clocked that little clue, but thought of it completely differently than I should have because the protagonist told me to, right? I was viewing it through the protagonist's point of view, and the way that they saw it is the way that I took it because they were dead sure of another logical answer. So I've given this example before, so apologies for those of you who heard me say this, but like, you come downstairs, you live alone, and there's a window that's open. And you're like, oh, like the wind blew it open, or, I forgot to unlock, it's like, I forgot to lock it yesterday when I was cleaning it, or like the cat or whatever. And actually, it's because someone broke into your house and is hiding in the closet. But you don't assume that because you're just a normal person living your life. And you make the assumption that it's something else. And then when the person jumps out of nowhere in the middle of the night, you are like, oh my God, I should have paid attention to my instincts and my favorite murder instincts and not gotten murdered right now. But that's a dead logical way of looking at it, right? You don't assume that someone has broken in. You assume that it's your fault and you forgot to lock it. So these clues that you have that the protagonist is viewing, what makes those satisfying is that they're not out of nowhere. They are on the page for the reader to experience. They're on screen. And so, in the case of the window, if you have the man jumping out of the closet in the middle of the night, if the window wasn't open and the protagonist didn't see that earlier, it's going to feel out of nowhere. So we need the protagonist to see it on the screen and be like, wow, the window's open. That's super weird. I must have left it open. Moving along through their day, and then you have the reason that the window is open revealed later. So hopefully that makes sense. It's tiny reveals of the villain's truth are there for the POV person, the POV perspective and the reader to see. They're misinterpreted, and you cannot have a logical twist without these villain truths that are popping up through the story. Unsatisfying twists on the flip side are convenient. They are not earned. So you may have something that feels like a hard left turn that the reader couldn't possibly have guessed. And so in the case of the man, hiding in your house, like, why are they there? Does it feel like it's just sort of like, oh, I was having a really wonderful life and I was, going and getting my coffee and walking the dog. And then all of a sudden there's this thing and it's not earned. That's going to feel to the reader like, I kind of get it. It's like a jump scare, but it doesn't really feel like it's part of this story or anything to do with what's actually going on. And so it's really important to avoid those and to think about like what could be tropish, what could be predictable, and then turn that on its head. So, if a person is hiding in your house, maybe they're not trying to kill you. Maybe they're trying to kill your best friend who was supposed to come and stay with you that weekend. And it turns out your best friend was actually a spy. And all of this is something that you learn much later. There's a twist, right? You have no idea that your friend was a spy. I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent. That was a little weird, but hopefully you followed what that actually meant. If you have too many clues, the twists are also very expected, right? So if you lay it out and you're like, wow, there was somebody following me and I totally ignored it because, who would want to murder me? And then, oh, my window's open, but totally the cat. And oh, there's like a bloody footprint, but like that could have been me too. you know, like it's just going to feel like, okay, someone's in your house, dude, like go and like not be in your house. That kind of thing. That's where beta readers come in, which we will cover at some point, which is just seeing like when they got it. That's a really important way as a writer to be able to assess, like, is this too predictable? And if it is, what if you took out the bloody footprint? What if you took out them noticing somebody was following them? What if you took out that, you know, the window was flapping in the breeze? What if it just was unlocked and they didn't quite notice, but it's on the screen just enough? And then new motivations and assumptions can also make a really big difference in terms of looking at a twist and having it be tropish. So I don't know, what's the typical trope? Like somebody shouted out, give me a trope.
The butler did it.
The butler did it, right? Okay, so you're in a mansion, it's haunted, you're at a party, there's a butler. Like the butler is super creepy and just like carrying a knife, like whatever, right? What if you lean into that and have your POV person be like, wow, the butler totally did it. And then the butler ends up doing it. That is twisty because you are playing with the reader's assumptions that the butler did it. And then having them be like, well, obviously the butler didn't do it because you're leading me there. And then actually the butler ended up being the person in the very end. So think about what you're leading the reader to think through the POV person, acknowledge tropes as they're happening, and then use those predictions and assumptions to turn a trope on its head. So the other big reminder is that the truth can change. So the protagonist is going to move through the story. They can be 100% sure that something's going on right up until that villain's truth is revealed. And this applies to everything. Honestly, I think that twists are the most satisfying when you have these logical assumptions and the protagonist is very, very into what they think is actually going on. It's how you create a very satisfying red herring right up until they change their mind. Twists can become a little bit less satisfying if you have someone questioning their own logic. If they're like, well, you know, there was that guy following me and maybe he snuck into the house, but like, probably not. I'm just going to turn off the lights and go to bed. And then when they jump out, it's like, well, duh, you know, whereas it was something, you know, if you have them being completely sure that it was them, it's totally different. One caveat, the truth has to be accurate in the final twist because this is a genre expectation for MTS. We want things to be explained right down to the very last detail. And so remember, your POV is your guide. What the protagonist thinks the reader is going to think. It is ample opportunity to mislead the reader. So when we are ideating twists, don't ideate a twist as a concept. Come up with the mastermind villain's truth and then ideate the misdirection. So come at it from the end, come at it from what the villain is doing and what the villain has, what their main goal is, where they end at the end of the story, which means obviously we're going to go into this, but like thinking through what the story actually looks like from the villain's perspective, and then look at when those villain truths pop up and then back into it from the way that the protagonist is receiving what's going on. And I will go more into this in just a second, but I never ever want anyone to think like, oh, I need to make this twistier. Like I'm just going to throw a twist in. Twists are just reveals of what's actually going on, which means that you have to know what's going on. So throwing in some random thing will not make it twisty. It will make it confusing. And your readers are going to be like, I don't like that. It came out of nowhere and it made me very unsatisfied. So the first step in ideating twists is to know your mastermind villain very, very deeply. Why do they want what they want? Why are they killing people or following your protagonist or, I don't know, stealing corn or whatever like mystery that they're a part of, whatever bad thing they're doing? Why don't they take the easy way out, which is to stop? You know, like this is often a question that in my own work, when I'm trying to figure this stuff out, it's like, okay, well, if someone's doing a bad thing, why would they keep doing it when someone starts paying attention, which is usually your protagonist, right? Like when the protagonist starts ruining the villain's life, why wouldn't the villain just be like, yeah, I'm done. This is way too hard. This person is obviously very dogged and is going to come after me for months. So like, why make the effort? What motivates them? Why is this so important to them that they're doing this bad thing? And, you know, because we write MTS, sometimes this involves murdering people, right? And so why do they keep doing this? What is their end game? What reason do they have? And then write down the logical progression of what the villain's actions are throughout the story. This is the Jenny Nash Pixar story spine method. It's very classic for a reason. I love doing this. I make all my clients do this. And the high level version is that you start with once upon a time, which is sort of like the baseline, like here I am, I'm in this house in the woods and I'm here for a reason. One day I left the window open. Because of that, somebody snuck in. This is from the protagonist's perspective, not the villains, but you get the point. So it's like once upon a time, one day something happened, inciting incident. In the villain's perspective, this is going to be one day the protagonist saw me murdering someone and then decided to figure out who I was. Because of that, I had to move out of my house and now I'm pissed. Because of that, I had to go and do this other thing over here. And then I almost got caught doing this other thing until finally I faced off with the protagonist. And ever since that day, I ran away and now live in a smaller cabin in the woods. Or ever since that day, I got arrested. Now I'm jail and I'm plotting my revenge. So the pattern is once upon a time, one day because of that, and there's several because of that, until finally, which is the climactic scene, and then ever since that day is the wrap up. It's very simple, it's very high level, and it can really, really help you understand if your villain actually has, I keep using the word legs, but that's kind of not the best way of describing it, like forward momentum through the story, right? So if it's because of that, because they encountered the protagonist, everything fell apart. What do they do with that? What did they do when the protagonist came in and ruined everything? Did they potentially plant fake clues? Did they actively mislead the protagonist? Did they run away? Were they being chased? Did they go after them and fail? What do they do about it when the protagonist comes in? And so your story spines may not overlap. Like when you do the protagonist one and the villain one, your villain one may have started way in the past. This could be something where I found a buried treasure when I was 10 and I've been protecting it ever since. And then, up until this day, on like the third because of that, when the protagonist saw me doing something with it and started to research where this treasure came from, all of a sudden I have to start dealing with this because my goals are now being thwarted by this very angry, person who just wants to stop me from doing my thing. And so think of your villain almost like they are the hero of their own story, but what were they doing? Why were they doing it? What did they do about it when somebody started trying to stop them? And then that's how you end up having this spine that shows your logical progression with what the villain's actually doing beneath the surface in that cardboard example. And then your climax is when the protagonist actually faces the villain. And this could be the fake villain, by the way. This could be the person that the protagonist thinks is the villain, and you're actually going to have your protagonist face the mastermind villain in the final twist. But the climactic scene is where the main story question is addressed. And so if you have this case of the mastermind villain who's standing there like watching the whole thing from the cliff top, and the protagonist and the fake villain are facing it off and figure out who did the killing of the first person that ended up starting this entire story. What is this mastermind villain seeing? Why are they not involved in it? Or if you have your main villain facing off in the climactic scene, what's at stake for them? What choice do they make? This concept of like rock and hard place, next bad choice, sacrifice, like there's all kinds of advice out there. Story Grid has great things about this, about the next bad choice, right? It applies to your villain too. It's not just your protagonist. And so how far are they willing to go to get done what they want to get done? And where is their breaking point? Villains often like have nothing to lose, which is super, super scary. But how far are they really willing to go? Like, is there a fate that's worse than death? Are they going to, keep doing this horrible thing? Are they going to take out the protagonist with them? Are they willing to die for what they're doing? We're writing in a difficult genre because all of these things are questions that may well have the answer of yes. And these are hard things to think about. And so that's why I tell people to focus on this pretty early, because if you can figure out what these rock hard place choices are, you're going to understand your villain and understand them deeply enough to understand, like, are they willing to die for what's going on? And if so, why wouldn't they have, tried harder earlier? Like, why now in the climactic scene? Is this the point where they're willing to like go all the way for it? And then the explanation, this is what happens. I mean, it's classic for a reason. It feels a little bit cheesy when you're writing it, but the readers expect this in this genre. And so this is going to be like that villain conversation where usually the protagonist is like tied up or something, and the villain's like, oh, I've got you now, and like, here's why I did all these things. And there's always like this conversation. There are ways to make it not cheesy. There's all kinds of, read widely, right? And you'll see how other people do it. But we do need some sort of explanation about what's actually going on. And so this is where all those on-screen clues are referenced. So it's like, oh, that that day that, you know, it's like, how did you get into my house? I didn't even realize the window was open. And they're like, you left it open. I was watching you for the last 4 months or whatever it is. I was waiting until the perfect time. Like all those little clues that you can look back on that the protagonist has like clocked, the reader's going to think like, ah, I totally knew that. I saw it, but I didn't think about it the way that I should have. Um, it's the explanation of why instead of just what. So it's not just like, oh, I killed that person. It's like, I killed that person because of this huge reveal, right? Like this twist, that the reveal of the villain's truth right then becomes twisty because the protagonist didn't even know to ask that question. And that is a Ruth Ware, Claire McIntosh definition of a twist, by the way, which I really love. It is a reveal is an answer to the question that you knew to ask, and a twist is the answer to a question you didn't even know what to ask. You didn't even know to ask the question at all. I've taken it a step further where it's like, okay, that's great, but then how do you actually think about what question that is? And that involves figuring out what the villain's actually doing. So again, in the climactic explanation, this could be a realization that leads to the mastermind villain being revealed, but the climactic threat, like who did the bad thing, this is always going to be answered in the climax. Villains are not flat. Even if somebody's a scary serial killer or doing something else awful, to what end? Why are they doing it? Are they trying to protect something? Are they compelled to do this because of various reasons that, you know, happen to them? Like Frank, you probably learned a lot about this from talking to Len, who is an FBI profiler, for people who don't know that. Frank has cool connections. But, you know, why do people do what they do? There's a lot of really cool, like, nonfiction out there about why people do what they do. I think all of us are attracted to this genre because of the psychology behind why scary people do scary things. And so our readers are the same. They want to know why, not just what. The villain's actions are always going to make sense to them. The villains always believe they will succeed because otherwise, why would they even try? And this could include, this like climactic explanation can include just a teensy tiny bit of reader empathy for the villain. It's okay to have that. We actually kind of like it. It's like, oh, I don't feel quite so scared now. And I feel like a little bit more drawn into this story because I understand in some small way why this person would do these horrible things. True psychopathy is really, really difficult for people to empathize with for obvious reasons, but like, if we don't understand why someone does something, it's terrifying. But part of why I think, we being the global we, are attracted to true crime is trying to understand, okay, if I understand that this person did this for this reason, I can avoid it, right? And so if you have a villain who is a true psychopath who's just like killing people for no reason, it's scary, but it's scarier if we understand like, oh, they were trying to protect this thing. And it's like, kind of get it. And that also is like, I can maybe avoid that in the future. Does that make sense? It's kind of a fine line, but I think it can really help with understanding cool villains. Not that murdering is cool. It's not, it's terrible, but you know what I mean? Okay, so then the step 5 is the protagonist perspective. And so this is where you take the top of the cardboard and you already have because of that, your Pixar story spine from underneath. Now you're going to do the exact same thing for the protagonist and see where they match up. And these intersections where the villain truth pops up and your protagonist reacts to something, those are your on-screen truths, right? These are your tiny little holes ripping through that the protagonist is going to see and ignore and then do something else, or see and make a decision about, but it's going to move the story forward up until they meet each other in the climactic scene. Then you're going to play with it. Ask yourself, what if? I was talking to someone earlier today and it's like, yes, and yourself. This is a like corporate thing, right? Where you're not allowed to say no in a meeting because all ideas are good. Like this can actually be really helpful for you when you're ideating, and just think like, okay, well, what about this? And then what about this? And what about that? And if you hate it, whatever, don't use it. But sometimes this can lead you to very interesting places. And so play with the motivations, play with like, well, what if they met earlier? What if, you know, this was someone from their life that they didn't even know was like evil person who was plotting their demise? What if it was someone that they randomly accidentally saw them do something and they didn't even realize what they saw, but the villain is convinced that this person saw what they did and needs to take them out? what other logical explanations exist for the truths popping up? I mean, these are where red herrings come from, right? So if I see the open window and I assume actually it was the neighbor coming in because they needed sugar or something, why would they use the window? But it's like, okay, that could almost make sense. But now I'm kind of suspicious of my neighbor breaking in. Why didn't they just knock on the door? So now I'm convinced the neighbor is the murderer. And all of a sudden you're off, right? It starts to make like this sort of sense. So your POV person is going to interpret and then take action. And that's how you have logical progression in a story. And action leads to suspense because we don't know the outcome. And, you know, as the reader, we're like, why would you go in the dark woods at night? But to the protagonist, it's like, I have no other choice. There's somebody out there who's watching me or whatever. And so we read because we're never going to do this ourselves. Hopefully we're smarter than this. We're not going to go get murdered. But, you know, this action, this is where the suspense builds because we know we're reading MTS. We know some bad stuff's going to happen. And the suspense is how. So additional considerations for this. On-screen clue tracking is something you can use with these Pixar story spines. So as you sort of start to flesh it out, have your villain version and then make, and your protagonist version. And once you've combined those, start keeping like bullet points of what those clues are so that you can keep track of what needs to happen when, so that it actually makes logical sense when the reader gets to the end. Think about your aha moments. Think about your emotional starting place and your emotional ending point. Not every person needs to go through like some massive, like, oh my God, I have rethought everything I thought about myself. And this is this huge like realization for me in the climax. It can be like, oh, I actually am strong enough to conquer this. That I'm, you know, I'm made of sterner stuff than I ever thought possible. It can be like a little quieter like that, but it's still just as powerful. So if you have someone who's like, yeah, I can live by myself in the woods, that's totally fine. And there's a serial killer around, but no big deal, I can handle it. And then when they actually face it, they might have a moment of darkness where they're like, oh my God, this was the worst mistake of my life and I'm about to be killed. And then when they, you know, when it push comes to shove, it's like, no, my survival instinct is strong enough to be able to get me out of this. You know, it's sort of like The Martian comes to mind. Like this is a totally kind of side tangent, but that is a man versus nature, man versus himself, person versus themselves story where, you know, he's on Mars. He's about to die if he doesn't do something about it. He seriously considers being like, oh, you know, I guess this is it. And then the suspense comes from him fighting and how far will he go? It's exactly the same thing with thrillers in general. Like how far will the villain go to get done what they want? And how far is your protagonist going to go to protect themselves? And of course, it's going to come together in that climactic scene. And so again, once you have these kinds of these parallel story tracks, combine them into one document and ask yourself like, what really happened, which is what's on screen versus the off-screen stuff. So what is the villain actually doing when the protagonist is like, my window's open? Are they watching? Are they already in the house? You know, a la Scream, which I'm really glad they're remaking, by the way. Can't wait. So plan, but be flexible. Be ready to iterate. Nothing is set in stone. This is really fun. It should be fun. Sometimes it's hard. But it's a blast to just sit there and figure out like, why is my villain doing this? What's going on? How does my protagonist handle it? And then all of a sudden you have a story. It's okay to pivot. Unexpected villains do happen. In my first story, the person that ended up being the villain was not the villain when I first started writing. And I got to the climactic scene and was like, it really feels like super predictable that this person is the villain. And then one of my other characters walked in and like killed them. Sometimes, you know, we all know this, like this happens with writing, right? You get going and you're like, who are you? Oh my God, I guess you're the star of the story now. That's okay. This is where that magic comes in, that muse. And so I am a planner. I make my clients plan because I believe in it. But I also believe in being able to pivot and iterate as things come up. So new fake villains, new mastermind villains, like new subplots, all that stuff is okay. But the most important thing is that you have the on-screen clues and you keep an eye on the overall logic, right? You don't want to start here, take a hard left turn, go over there and end up in space, unless that was your goal the whole time. Like you want to have a arc of a story that actually makes sense. And remember, standard, books in the bookstore did not spring forth in their final state. Do not compare yourself to something that's on the shelf. It went through 85 pairs of eyeballs and months and months and months, if not years, of work. It takes a lot of effort and time and energy and determination and tenacity to do what we all do, which is write novels. This is not an easy thing. We do it because we love it and we can't do anything else. And we really want to tell stories, but don't compare yourself. It is a path to feeling super depressed, and I don't recommend it. Just do your best and keep writing the stories that need to be told and keep pushing forward. And that is exactly half an hour. Go me. So June webinar is going to cover, like I said, MTS genre subtleties. Wednesday, June 26th, 6 p.m. Eastern. If you're on our email list, you'll receive the invitation to join. And I'm going to email the link in the next few hours. Again, internet's a little sketchy today, but I'll do my best to get that uploaded and out in the next by no later than like tomorrow. And so that is it. Questions, we welcome them. If we don't have any, I'll quickly go through what Shadows and Secrets is, but by all means.
I have a question from Julie in the chat.
Yes.
I just want to make sure we, so I'll read it, Julie, unless you want to come on. I'm happy to do that.
You can read it.
Okay. So do the villain's 10 items that you were talking about when we were talking about stories find, do those 10 items need to be in the story, or can they be backstory that's revealed later?
What a good question. Totally backstory, can also be in the story, but it might not actually be on screen. It might be the only time we learn about it is during that climactic explanation or the final explanation, right? So this can be something where your villain's been like, I mean, I'll just go with a serial killer example. Your villain's been killing people for decades, and you know, they have their reasons and they're bopping along doing their thing, you know, because that's what they want to be doing with their lives. And it's like the ninth because of that is, oh, I got stopped because the protagonist caught me and now I have to deal with it. And then that's where the overlap happens. Or it could be that they're totally parallel and your protagonist is coming along and I don't know, is seeing weird things and can't make sense of it. And the only time that we ever hear about what the villain was actually doing is that 3 paragraph or 2 or even 1 explanation. Why do I keep doing that? Explanation in the climactic scene when they have that like what feels very dumb conversation of like, well, this is why I did the thing. But it needs to be there so that the reader can understand. So absolutely backstory. It's very important for you to know. It may not come out in the actual story itself. Yeah. And I'm not talking like character Bible, you know, essays, but like just understand them a little bit. Yeah. Great question.
And one thing too, I was thinking of, Sam, as you were talking, especially towards the later bits about iterating and also those moments of popping up. Sam and I do these deep dives. I think we've talked about them on these webinars before. And the next one that will be coming out, I think next week or the first week of June.
Hopefully not next week.
Taylor Adams' The Last Word. And I think that that book illustrates really, really well some of the stuff that we were talking about. So a little tease for that, and definitely recommend if you haven't read that book. So many twists, so many great
so
twists.
many twists. And I will say we've recommended, I have particularly, like I keep shouting about how amazing this book is. You got to get through it. I know that it's not everyone's cup of tea. Like the main character is a little bit of a bummer, and like the structure is a little weird in terms of what, you know, what is kind of more normal. It can be a little bit choppy if I'm being critical. I still love it in terms of like what he did with the plotting is like chef's kiss incredible with the twist. Like the execution is 10 out of 10. But if you hate it, please just give it a chance and like just skim it and get all the way through so that you understand what we're talking about, because it was amazing.
I think really it was a lot about, and I'm remembering this now too, about talking about the character's motivation. I mean, the protagonist in that book has a lot of hang-ups. She's got a lot of things going on, but finding her motivation to continue to go on, I think that he did a really masterful job of playing with that and illustrating that and making it very, very clear all along. Like there should be many moments you'd think where she just wants to be like, I'm done, but finds those reasons.
Then like without spoiling anything, the final reveal of what's actually going on, the motivation there as well makes perfect sense. And it's not someone who's a psychopath, it's something else. So it's 10 out of 10. Do you want to do the other questions, Kerry or Frank? We can call on you with your hand raised. Where'd he go?
I just wanted
Oh, there
to,
he is. Okay.
oh, here I am. I put in the chat a link to a seminal article that the FBI has used to sort of help explain the motivations of many people, including serial killers. It's called the
Amazing.
Tetrad. So you have to download it, unfortunately, but it's a seminal piece of work.
Awesome. Kerry, will you grab that and we'll include it in the email that goes out
Yep.
later? Thank you, Frank. That's really nice.
Yeah. I'm afraid to click on it now, but
Okay.
so I'll share it out. Thank you, Frank. That's awesome.
All right. Sorry, I'm actually like I'm in the woods right now. I'm at a second property that we have, and a very large weasel just walked by. It was like huge. It was really disconcerting. Julie, your face. Yeah. I'm not outside, it's outside. The
Oh my
deep
goodness,
dive
that's
thing.
Somerville.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, so you're talking about mastermind villain. So if you're having multiple villains that your protagonist is dealing with, is it the same kind of thing? Like you're tracking out, okay, here's what the mastermind villain is doing, like the big underlying twist, and then you've got your other plot twist based upon like your subplots, right? And then you're plotting each one of those villains and then how the protagonist is going to interact with each one of the villains, like layered in like that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. The only like warning I would give is that if you have too many villains and they don't somehow all kind of connect, that can get confusing and a more challenging thing for you to pull off, right? Because we need the reader to understand, okay, that was a total red herring and it was a threat, right? There was somebody who was trying to stop the protagonist from living their life. But even if it wasn't like totally related to what was going on, it's going to, the reader and the POV are going to assume it is related. And so the fact that it's not related is a twist in and of itself, right? Because otherwise, why would they pursue it? You're not typically going to have like, oh, I'm being pursued by two different murderers who both want me dead. Like there's going to be a core reason that those two people are connected. And even if that reason is like what you, the protagonist, did. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like, if you have like, I don't know, like a classic, really tropey version of this is like a number of hitmen have been hired to come after you because you know something, right? And it's like a bounty hunter situation. All those people are connected because somebody put out the call on the dark web about wanting you dead. And so all of a sudden you have to fight off all these different people. These people might be unrelated, but you're the common connection. And there was someone who started this whole thing.
Okay.
Does that help?
That's helpful. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Good question. Elisa, is that how you say your name?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you for coming.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. I couldn't make the last couple. I really wanted to. Well, first of all, I was really grateful to hear your definition of twists. And if I'm understanding them correctly, let's hope I am. It's kind of when the villain's story comes out from the little hole in the cardboard from beneath to kind of penetrate. And that's the twist. And so on one hand, I'm like, oh my God, thank God, because I've never thought that I was a good twist. Twists seem out of my ken.
They're hard, yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, that's good to know. But even so, knowing, I'm like, okay, that's clarifying. But how do you make the twists awesome? You know what I mean? And I get the open window thing, but like sometimes you read a twist and you're just like, that feels so good.
Yeah. I mean, it all comes back to the villain's motivation, right? And like once it's like I guess it's kind of parallel. So you have what your villain's doing, and there's only so many things that a villain can do. Like there's only so many bad things that people can do. And so why are they doing it is the reason. So you might have someone where you're like, well, you're a run-of-the-mill serial killer. And then it turns out that they're coming after you personally because of something you did to them way back in the day, or your parents did, or whatever, right? There's some connection. Those like deep connections are what make things feel very, very satisfying. Okay. Again, the last word like nailed this in a way that I hadn't seen before. And that's why I like keep shouting about it, is because I just think that the ending of that book was like, I was reading it for the first time and I think I yelled what out loud. And my husband was like, who are you talking to? What's happening? It's also what makes twists be really, really satisfying is when your protagonist is dead sure. And in a way that makes logical sense, right? So it's not just like, I'm ignoring the fact that someone's following me through the woods right now, because that's obviously the giant weasel, right? It's like, I'm not even noticing that anyone's back there, but like, oh, that's a sweatshirt that was left by a hiker. It's this is a very hiked trail. Like people are here all the time. And then all of a sudden it becomes like, oh my God, I'm not safe at all. Like everything I thought about my environment is completely wrong and I'm in grave danger. And that's how you create that suspense.
It's almost like you're reverse engineering it, right? So you're
Oh,
like, okay,
100%. Yeah.
a pretty good idea of a twist. And then you go backwards or earlier into the story and you're like, now we're going to tweak this and tweak this.
Yes.
And it's kind of like adding a little yellow highlighter for later.
Exactly.
Okay.
Very, very well said. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, again, the twistiness comes from the reader being, and the POV character being completely convinced it's something else. And so the more you can make that be the opposite of what they thought, the more satisfying it's going to feel, particularly if there were clues along the way that the reader didn't even clock because they were glossed over. So it's like, I'm looking around the room. There's, a jacket on the floor over there. There's a weasel outside. There's an open window. There's, a dog. There's like people that are on the deck that are my friends. There's a whole list of stuff. All of it matters for the story. But the thing that matters really, the clue, is the open window. Right. And so it's like when you're clocking what the environment looks like, and this is the fun thing about writing MTS too, is like every single thing that the POV character notices is either there to misdirect, or it's a villain clue, or it's there to confuse the reader on purpose, but nothing is random. I'm not going to sit here and tell you about like this floral bedspread that has nothing to do with anything, unless it's hiding a blood spot, right? And be like, wow, those flowers are like really red. Why? Sorry, I am so dark. It just like, this is, you guys are all my people, but please don't judge me. I'm not a murderer. Yeah. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Any other questions?
Eric, I see you have a question. Do you want to come on? Or you want me to ask it for you?
Sure. Hopefully it's not too loud here.
Oh, no, you're fine.
So I was wondering, how you would handle if the villain is the second POV.
Ooh.
I mean,
yeah.
Which gets equal time, right up until the
Yeah.
end.
I mean, so the biggest thing, it's totally doable. It is a little harder, right? Because you don't want the villain to come straight out and be like, I'm the killer. Unless you do. That's also a choice you could make. But the biggest thing is that the POV cannot lie via their interiority to the reader. The expectation, unless you're doing omniscient or something, but that's not as popular with MTS for a reason, because there's a huge filter and it's just not as satisfying for the reader. We want to be in people's heads. We want to understand how they're experiencing the world and what they're clocking. And so if you have the villain and they're the person who's actually going to be the person doing the bad thing the whole time, what they say out loud can be utter lies. Any conversation they have out loud, what they think inside their head needs to be, and this is where the tricky part comes in, needs to make sense with a different perspective from the reader, and also from the perspective of, I am the person doing the bad thing. So like, I'm flying on a plane tomorrow to go to my job. If the expectation is that the job is working in a tech company, it's no big deal. If the reality is that the job is being a professional hitman, that's very different. Right. And so you can say, like, the person can think like, oh, I'm really nervous about this thing I have to do tomorrow. And the reader thinks from the other POV that this person just works in a boring office job. It could be like, oh, they might assume that the person is nervous about a big presentation or something. Whereas your villain can be like, wow, I'm really nervous about tomorrow. I hope it goes well. Because we've been set up to think that they're about to go do this other very normal thing, it makes sense. But villain POVs are often kind of shorter for that reason, which can clue the reader into thinking like, why are we seeing so much less from this person? Which is why it's tough. So one classic way to handle it is to have just first person and it's only I, like I'm looking at this, I'm thinking this. And so we know they're the killer, but we don't know who they are in the story at large, right? That can work really well, and it makes sense that you can have shorter little things. I will say that is a bit overdone. I tried it in my first novel, and my agent was like, no. So I think if it's done well, it can potentially work, and there are ways to do it. Again, this is reading widely, right? Like we see how our fellow writers are doing it, and we can gain inspiration and be taught by how they handled these kinds of things. But it's definitely tough. It's doable. You just can't lie to the reader. So
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Nancy mentioned in the chat too that there a book by Peter Swanson, The Kind Worth Killing, which I have not. I've read Peter Swanson, but I haven't read this one. But I definitely will be. That has a POV as one of the villains. So
Oh, excellent. Oh, I'll read it. Yeah, I adore Peter Swanson. 8 Perfect Murders was like just an incredible book. But I'll check that out too. Thank you for suggesting
the
that.
other one, I think, maybe not as directly, and you and I debated, Sam, in our deep dive about who actually was the villain, but The Last Mrs. Parrish.
Yeah.
Because that has those 2 POVs. And which one is the villain?
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good point. Is that deep dive released yet? I don't want to spoil
Yeah, that
it.
deep dive is out.
Okay. So if you haven't read it, I don't know. Maybe if you, I don't know, mute us or something, like we're about to spoil it just a touch. I'm not going to tell you all the things, but there's 2 POVs, and the assumption going in is one thing, and then that assumption is turned on its head. And so that is a way to have the villain, quote unquote, have a very strong POV and be on the page, but it works because the assumptions are just like wildly misleading, starting with the book jacket copy. And it works in the order that they tell
book
it.
Is that?
The Last Mrs. Parrish by Liv Constantine. It was a breakout hit for a very good reason. They just kind of threw the genre on its head and just absolutely nailed it.
All of these, we'll put them in the notes too of all the books that we've referenced. We've thrown out some good ones.
Yeah. But yeah, great question, Eric. It's tough, and if you figure out a tried and true way to do it, please let us know.
Well, what I'm doing so far is time shifting, so that don't realize. So that's why when this Last Mrs. Parrish sounds similar to what I'm trying. So maybe I'll check it out.
Yeah, definitely check it out. Yeah, that's great. You just made me think of another book that I don't even want to talk about because it'll ruin it. So Kerry, remind me and I'll tell you, and we'll do a deep dive, and then we'll have people read it, and then we'll talk about it.
Excellent. Now I'm intrigued.
That was so cryptic, and I'm really sorry. I just don't want to ruin it.
Oh, goodness.
Anybody else have any questions? All right, so I'm going to spend like 2 minutes just going through what Shadows and Secrets is for those of you who have not heard about us before. So we are a 5-day writing retreat. We will be this year in September 25th to 29th in Salem, Massachusetts, most haunted hotel. And we are focused on mystery, thriller, and suspense authors who are looking for a transformation on their work in progress. So what does this mean? This can be somebody who's ideating a story and wants to just jumpstart their entire planning process. Planners and pantsers are both welcome. We will be doing planning, but we are very iterative and open, and this is not like a box where we're going to force you into it. It's going to be very easy to fit you in wherever you are in this process. You could be revising, you could be halfway through, you could be stuck, you could, be thinking about your new manuscript and not have written a word, but you have an idea. We're looking for people who are serious writers. You're willing to put in the work. Ideally, you've written a full-length novel, published or not, that doesn't really matter, but we're looking for people who are not like super beginners. We want people who know what it takes to write a novel. I think all of us, when we first started, can remember being like, wow, this should be like an easy thing. I should just be able to sit down and write a whole book and it should be no problem. We're looking for you once you've realized that that is not the case. And you are here on the Dunning-Kruger curve. You've slid down and you're like not rock bottom, but you're maybe just starting to learn again and you're open to improving. But really, this is going to be a very coaching intensive weekend. Kerry and I adore this work. This is our soul work, our life's work. And we are looking for 12 writers to join us and have a wildly inclusive, fun, cuss-filled, sorry, we like the F word quite a bit, weekend where we're going to focus really, really intensely on each and every one of your stories and brainstorm the shit out of anything that needs brainstorming. And if you're not in a haunted hotel, this maybe isn't the right retreat. We're going to keep finding haunted stuff to put these retreats in. So lots of built-in downtime, but we're going to be busy. Kerry and I both recognize and respect and love the idea that a retreat is actually a retreat, and not something where we're going to schedule you for the entire time. So if you're, you know, having a flow day, you're deep diving in and you really don't want to stop, that's totally fine. The mornings are going to be like highly encouraged to come, and the afternoons are going to be, if you can, then please do if you're stuck and you want more help. But we're going to roll with what people need for the actual retreat, along with coaching you and making sure you get through what you need to get through. There's going to be wine, no problem if you don't drink, but there will be alcohol on site. You're going to make a bunch of new friends. We're focused on brainstorming solutions versus rewriting. Kerry and I both feel very strongly that there's usually, almost always, 99.99% of a way to get through a plot problem without having to rework the entire thing and rewrite the entire thing. There's always a way to look at your character list and be like, well, what about that person? You know, like, what if they were this? What if these two people were combined? What if that person was actually this person over here and they had this reason? So we're going to do a ton of deep dives into character, twist brainstorming, unblocking, and our goal is that you walk away with a completed, revised, or made from scratch outline with 3 twists. And you will understand exactly what you need to do to hit the ground running to revise or write forward. And it's going to be super fun because Kerry and I are awesome.
So true.
Yeah. And if you want to apply, we're rolling applications. We are filling spots as we speak. And so there are still a few left. We would love to have you. It's, you know, the application is just like, fill out this form and then we will request a call with you so we can get to know each other a little bit. And we're just looking to curate a really fantastic group of humans who love this stuff as much as we do and want to come hang out in a hopefully not too haunted hotel with us in Salem.
I'm not sure where they're going to put us, but it sounds like if we stay away from the 6th floor, we're probably going to be okay. So
yeah, watch my room be like 666 or something, and I'll run screaming down the hallway at 3 a.m. Yeah. Well, thank you all very, very much for coming. We really appreciate you all showing up. It's a pleasure to meet you. And if you have any questions, we're on shadowsandsecretsretreats.com. There's a contact form. You can send us an email. I do look at it a lot, so I promise we will reply. And we also have an Instagram feed where Kerry has been fantastic about posting fun notes about Salem and all kinds of other content. And if you're coming to Thriller Fest again, please say hi. And even if I'm like walking quickly away, just be like, hi, it's me. I come to your things.
And I will be there, and I will hopefully not have that haunted look behind me because I'll just be there to cheer Sam on and soak up all the goodness that is going to be happening.
Yeah,
and I think we're going to try towards the very end, if anybody's going to be there and would like to meet up, I'm going to try to tear Sam away and just like slam a glass of wine into her hand and be like, breathe for a minute and come sit and chill with me and anybody else who wants to like come to the bar and hang out. That would be great. So keep an eye out. I'll post on the Instagram about plans around that. But yes, please say hi to me too.
Yeah, Kerry will be there the whole time. She'll have shadows swag, including
I will have
Olivia.
shadow swag, so please also come.
Yeah, and I'll just tell you all this because it's really funny. Olivia has seen this in real life. I messed up the order for the bookmarks that we ordered for putting like on the swag table at conferences. Oh, she's going to pull it out for us. I accidentally ordered one that was like the size of my head. It's like a bumper sticker size. And then we also have little normal bookmarks, but if you see the large ones, just know that that was my mistake, and they look really good on swag tables because they kind of pop out, but we did not intend those to be bookmarked. Or we did, but it didn't actually turn out that way. So yeah, real humans over here, just making mistakes sometimes. Yeah.
They're pretty great, and we will have them there. So if you'd like a head-sized bumper sticker bookmark, you can say you are in on the ground floor of that at Thriller Fest.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you guys all so much. We are around on email or on Instagram. You can DM us anytime, and we'd love to hear from you. And we really appreciate you coming. And we hope to see you either next week at Thriller Fest or in June for our next one. Bye,
Thanks,
everybody. I'm gonna stop recording. Bye, Frank. Bye, Vanessa.